guys, it's Jasmine, and today we're making a pumpkin flour bread. Fall has came and now pumpkins and squashes are now in season, so we're going to be making a pumpkin flour bread. This bread is a little different from other types of bread. It is not baked in a loaf pan. Instead, it is going to look something sort of like a cake, except it has a really pretty design on it, and it's also going to be really fun to make. So let's get started. For the ingredients you will need: 2 cups of all-purpose flour, a 1/3 cup of pumpkin puree, 1/2 cup of white granulated sugar, a pinch of salt, 1 egg, 4 tablespoons of butter, 1 teaspoon of instant yeast, a 1/4 cup of milk, 1/2 teaspoon of pumpkin spice, and some more additional melted butter. Since today we're going to be making a pumpkin bread, of course we're going to be needing some pumpkin puree. So today I'm going to be making my own, but of course you could buy it in a supermarket. Just make sure you're buying pure pumpkin puree. You could use a pumpkin or a squash. It is completely up to you. They all come out in the same result. So first I'm going to be peeling the pumpkin. I'm going to be using a vegetable peeler. You could also use a very sharp knife and carefully cut off the skin. Just make sure you be careful with the knife. I've cut up a whole pumpkin, although today we might not need all of it. We're only going to be using a 1/3 cup of pumpkin puree, so I'm going to store the rest of it in the fridge to use on something else. So on the stove I have a pot of boiling water. Today I'm going to be steaming the pumpkin so not too much moisture gets into the pumpkin puree and does not make the bread too sticky. So try to avoid boiling it. The amount of time I'm going to steam the pumpkin is going to depend on the size that I cut the pumpkin. So today I cut it into a size like this. This is going to take about 10 to 15 minutes. Place the pumpkin into a pot with boiling water and I'm going to steam it for 10 minutes. But the amount of time you need to steam it really depends on the size of your pumpkin pieces. And I'm going to steam it until I can insert a fork into the center of each pumpkin pieces and they're nice and soft. I'm going to take out the pumpkin, and if there are any water on the bottom of the plate, make sure you get rid of that because you want to keep the pumpkin puree as dry as you can. I'm going to take a potato masher and mash it until it is nice and smooth. You can also pop it into the blender or a food processor if you want to. Now we can start making the dough. I'm going to measure out a 1/3 cup of the pumpkin puree and then put the rest of them in the fridge to use it on something else. I'm going to be making my dough inside of a stand mixer today with a dough hook, but you could also do it by hand if you want to. First I'm going to add in the all-purpose flour. Now I have 2 extra tablespoons just in case the dough is too sticky because the amount of liquid inside of the pumpkin puree may vary for you. Then I'm going to add in the white granulated sugar, pumpkin spice, and yeast. And make sure you're using instant yeast here because we're not going to be activating it with any warm water. Then I'm going to add in the salt, then add in the egg. We're only going to be using a 1/3 cup of pumpkin puree, the milk, and I'm only going to be adding in half of the milk for now because we don't know if we're going to need the other half since again the amount of liquid inside of the pumpkin puree may vary for you. So we're only going to add it in the other half if the dough is not wet enough. The unsalted butter at room temperature, make sure it is nice and soft because it won't mix into the dough so well if it is really hard. And I do have 2 bowls of butter here today. One of them is a 1/4 cup, which we will be using in the dough itself. And the other one is 3 tablespoons, which we'll be brushing between the layers of dough, which I will show you how to do later on. Prepare a large bowl which the dough will be rising in, so you want to make sure it's large enough and has enough space. And I'm going to spray it with some non-stick cooking spray to make sure that the dough doesn't dry out while it's rising and doesn't stick to the bowl once it's done. If you don't have any non-stick cooking spray, you could also just use oil and oil the bottom with your hands. I've been kneading this dough for around 10 minutes. It is now not sticky anymore. It's not sticking to my hands. And today I did not use any extra milk or any extra flour. It is at the perfect consistency. You want to make sure the sides of the bowl are clean. It might stick to the bottom just a little. And you also want to make sure it doesn't stick to your hands. You really have to control the amount of milk you use yourself because it's up to the amount of liquid inside the pumpkin puree. I'm going to shape it into a ball. I'm going to roll the dough around in the bowl so it catches some of those grease. I have a lid, but you could also use some plastic wrap or a damp towel. And I'm going to set this aside for somewhere warm for it to rise for about an hour or so until it has doubled in size. And the amount of time you have to rise it depends on the temperature of where you put it. The dough has been rising for about an hour. You can see it has doubled in size. So now we can start to shape it. I'm going to set it aside. And you want to prepare a cutting board, which I'm going to dust with a light layer of flour. I'm going to flip the dough out to the cutting board. Now I'm going to measure the dough so I could divide it into 5 equal pieces because we're going to be kneading 5 layers inside of this bread. I have a scale here and I lined it with some plastic wrap so nothing sticks. The dough weighs 663 grams in total, so I'm going to divide it by 5, which comes out to 132 grams. So I'm going to make each section 132 grams until I have 5 pieces. And today to cut it, I'm going to be using a bench scraper. I use this quite often when it comes to working with dough, but if you don't have a bench scraper, you could also just use a knife. Form each piece into a ball and then set it aside. I like to knead it up a little bit. That was the last piece, so now I have 5 equal pieces of dough, 132 grams each. Now I'm going to set it aside while I prepare the butter. So I have some unsalted butter here, and I'm going to microwave it just slightly until it is almost melted, so we can brush it between each layer. Now we can start rolling it out. So I'm going to take a piece of the dough and roll it out. You can roll it out to whatever size you like. Today I'm going to roll it out to about 8 inches. And I also have a bowl here which I will use as kind of like a cookie cutter. You could also use a plate if you like to. Once you got the right size, place the bowl over the dough. Make sure it is right size and slightly bigger because we're going to be cutting off the excess later on. I have my second piece of dough. Now before I place it onto the first piece, I'm going to brush a layer of melted butter in between. So this is a mandatory step because if you don't do it, there are no things to separate 2 layers and they will stick together, so you won't get the same effect later on. You want a nice generous layer of butter, not too much though, but if you put too little, then again it's not going to work out exactly the same. Once you got the butter on, we're going to place on the second layer of dough. Cover the first layer completely. I have all 5 layers of dough in a stack with melted butter in between each layer. So now to make sure that it's an even stack, I'm going to take the parchment paper, slide it onto the cutting board, take the bowl, which is 8 inches that I used as a reference. Then I'm going to take a knife and cut off any excess dough so that it is nice and even. Now you don't have to do this if you don't want to. This is just making sure that the bread is perfectly round. But again, you can skip it if you don't feel like it's necessary. Then take off the bowl and you have a perfectly round bread. So I only have a little bit of excess dough today, but if you have a lot, you could make a 6th layer and again, brush butter in between. But I don't have that much, so now we could start cutting it and flipping it and making the design. Now to make the design, first we're going to take a sharp knife and cut it into 8 equal pieces. So you want to leave about ½ centimeter near the edge. You don't want to cut it through completely. Make sure you cut through the dough completely. Once you've got 8 pieces equally, we're going to cut a small hole in each triangular part. Now we're going to start flipping the dough so it starts looking more like a flower. So take a section, make sure the hole is opened up. We're going to flip the dough and through the hole, something like this. I'm flipping inwards, and then flip it out like that. Make sure you're doing the same direction for each one. And now take each section and flip it back inwards so it makes a circle again. And I like to connect the tips. Like to sort of pinch it together. Do not press it down afterwards because that will ruin the design. Now I'm going to slide this back onto the baking tray. And then we're going to place this somewhere warm for it to rise again until it is doubled in size, and then we can bake it off. The bread has now doubled in size, so before I put it into the oven, I want to have a nice and golden brown color after it is baked. So I'm going to be brushing on a layer of egg white. I'm going to first separate the egg. Once I've separated the egg white from the egg yolk, I'm going to slightly whip it up just until it's nice and loose because you don't want like a clump of egg white. You want to whip it to the stage where when you pick up the fork or spoon or whisk, nothing much sticks to it. There's not a big clump of egg white. So now grab a pastry brush, get some of that egg white, and brush on a nice thin layer of egg white. If you brush on too much, the color might end up being too dark. So just a thin layer would do. Now this is an optional step. You could also brush it with egg yolk, egg wash, or melted butter. Today I'm doing egg whites. I've brushed on a thin layer of egg whites, so now I'm going to place it into the oven at 325 degrees Fahrenheit for around 20 to 22 minutes. The pumpkin flour bread has baked in the oven at 325 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 minutes. This is nice and golden brown on top. It is very soft and looks really nice. You can see it has a really pretty design on top. It looks really like a flower. That's how you make a pumpkin flour bread. This is a lot special from other types of bread because it's not a loaf pan and it has a really pretty design on top. It is perfect for fall since pumpkins are in season, and it's also great for Halloween and Thanksgiving are both coming up. So I hope you can try this out. It is a really soft bread and smells really nice. It could work perfectly for breakfast or dinner, pretty much any time of the day that you feel like eating something tasty. Thanks for watching and see you guys next time. Bye!